Right, so today I'm going to do a fly that I've had quite a few requests for. It's a Baitfish Zonker. Takes a little bit of time to tie, but it's a style you can use to actually imitate specific baitfish. It swims very nicely in the water. You can do it weighted or not, and I've caught some very nice trout in it. When the trout are breeding, you often find the cockfish becoming very aggressive, and that's a time when this fly's worked very well for me in the Eastern Cape Islands. Right, so today I'm going to do a fly that I've had quite a few requests for. It's a Baitfish Zonker. Takes a little bit of time to tie, but it's a style you can use to actually imitate specific baitfish. It swims very nicely in the water. You can do it weighted or not, and I've caught some very nice trout in it. When the trout are breeding, you often find the cockfish becoming very aggressive, and that's a time when this fly's worked very well for me in the Eastern Cape Islands. So what I'm using here, I'm doing a weighted version. You can do it in a jig style and just reverse the entire thing. Jig style like I did with the CDC bugger in my previous video. This one is just for trout still waters rather than largemouth yellowfish in rivers, so I've just put a normal bead on the hook, and I'm tying it upright. I'm using a size 10 Gamakatsu B10S here. So I'm going to start by adding a little bit of flash to the tail. I'll usually use 4 strands. And you can play around with the colors. You'll find me saying that quite a lot. You can play around a lot. When I'm tying for largemouth yellowfish, I often do the whole thing in black, and then this flash out the back is gold. I'll use gold eyes at the end. So I'm going to leave this quite long for the moment, and I'll trim it to the correct length later on. I don't have my favorite colors at the moment, so I'm just tying with colors that I have as a demonstration of how to tie the fly. Once you've tied in the flash, you can prepare your zonker. The fish won't care, but I like to cut the tip of the zonker to a point like that. It just makes it look neater. You can tie this in fairly long for the back. Right, now turn it upside down, and you're going to choose 2 colors of sculpting fiber for the belly, or the belly and sides. So in this case I'm using a sort of, it's actually called rusty olive, and the other one is sort of off-white, slightly on the green side. Use whatever's going to match the color of the baitfish in your local water. I'm sure you can use other fibers, doesn't have to be sculpting fiber. I've just always used it, and it seems to have the right sort of texture for the size 6s and 8s that I make these in. You're going to tie it to match the length of the skin of the zonker that's sticking out the back. Your first clump, even though it's facing backwards and it's underneath, is actually going to be the color of the sides rather than the belly. Just because that's how you're going to fade the colors in. It looks more realistic. Oh, with this clump that I'm folding back, I'll do it a little bit more on the sides. I'll split it and then tie it in like that. Now you're going to move your thread forward slightly, and this is where you start with the lighter one. This is now going to be the color of the belly of the fish. My sculpting fiber is pretty stuffed, but I should be able to use it. This one came out of a packet in my bag and it got all tangled, but right, now this I make a little bit shorter than the previous clump. It's not going to extend all the way to the back. You'll see if you look at actual baitfish, it's very rare that the very pale underbelly actually extends all the way to the tail. It usually extends to the pelvic fins. Then when you fold this over, you don't want it to be on the sides. This pail is directly underneath. Because the sides are reserved for the bronze color. Right, now you've tied in those. What I like to do is I like to add a little bit of UV dubbing as flash. For the belly, I'm going to use this. It's the label. It's the pearl iceturb. And then for the sides, I'll decide I'll either use that or the more bronze one. I'll probably stick with the lighter one. You'll see that this shimmers gold. You don't actually see it as orange. So this looks very nice with the bronze sculpting fiber. Let's take a few strands of that. And you're just going to tie it in on top of this white. Cool. Now you can move your thread forwards again and get the bronze. The bronze is going to go on the sides. So unfortunately what's comfortable for me is tying it on the side away from the camera first. And then I'll fold that round, tie it in on the side like that. You can trim that off. Then I'll take some of this dubbing and I'll tie it in along the sides in the same way I tied in the bronze sculpting fiber. So what this does is means you get a slightly different type of flash coming from the sides of your baitfish as underneath, and it helps it be more realistic. And now you can just repeat the process. Tie in the belly. As you move forwards, you can use shorter and shorter clumps. You're going to trim it later on. You just want the long clumps at the back so that you can taper it nicely towards the tail. Add a bit of flash again. And now the sides. You're just going to keep doing this until you get to the bead. Be careful not to tie the clumps right on top of each other, because you can see this little bulb here that's formed where you tie it over. If you tie your next clump right in there, it's going to force it to stick up, and it'll be fine, but it just looks slightly better if your sculpting fiber lies a little bit flatter. I don't know, maybe if you're fishing it at night you can get it to stick out and trim it so it'll push a little bit more water, but it's up to you. I prefer it lying a little bit flatter. This fly pushes enough water as it is. Okay, coming to the bead. So this is going to be the last set here. Here I'm actually going to tie in the sides and the belly together before I fold them over. Now you can bring the side round like that. It also helps to force the belly down. There you go. You can add more flash now. You don't have to. There's enough flash in the body. Now you can turn your fly back around like this. You can tie down the zonker. I don't have the best zonker here. I prefer it to be a little bit denser. This is quite a sparse, skinny zonker strip, but it'll do. You'll see this fly, the head of this fly really isn't neat at the moment because there's quite a lot going on here. It's quite sort of bulky. Don't worry about that for the moment. Now, I'm not going to cut the thread off yet, but I am going to start trimming. And this is when you really shape your baitfish. You can make it quite broad if you are trying to imitate a tilapia. It can be a fat little thing. Or if you're imitating barbs, you can cut the profile right down, make it quite skinny. You do want enough of your hook exposed that you don't miss fish. You can see there the colour is starting to look about right. You've got the nice white belly, you've got those bronze sides, and then you've got the movement from the zonker on the top. You want to get rid of some of the bulk. It's going to be quite a thick fly, so you want to just trim this down a little bit. I'm also adding some tape. Right, you get the idea. It's not absolutely perfect because I don't want to spend 20 minutes of this video just trimming it, but you do get the idea. Now if you want, you can add a hotspot. I don't always do this, but it can look pretty cool. In this case I'm going orange. If you're going with a more sort of realistic fly, I'm using orange and cron here. If you're going with a more realistic fly, then you can go with little short red gills, and then it forms the function of being both a hotspot and gills. Don't worry about cutting them to the right length right now. The main thing is to get them in the correct position. Now at this point you can get rid of your thread. Whip finish, use super glue, up to you. Always use super glue because I'm lazy and I never learned how to use a whip finish tool. Right, so now you have the main fly done. Now you've got to get it looking like a baitfish, and the best way you can do that is by adding some eyes. Choose the style of eyes that will best suit your baitfish. I'm going with some really big ones today, just because they're the right color. Now, what I usually use here, if I have time, if I'm not going fishing in the next hour or two, so I'll usually use Baitfish 100 for this entire head. Makes it a lot stronger than the other method. The other method, if you need to use your fly quickly, is you can take super glue and you can super glue your eyes on the side, and as soon as that super glue is dry you can build up the head with some UV resin. But I am going to rather do a Baitfish 100 head. Place that first eye and go around the other side and do the next one. Now you can spend a bit of time playing with them, getting the position right. Then you can either wait for it to set, or if you're lazy you can add some more patiks immediately just to fill in the gap between the eyes. This builds up a nice head. It's seriously strong as well. These eyes aren't going anywhere. Almost as strong as if you were using epoxy. Just get the head shape right. If you use quite a heavy dollop, you might have to turn it every 5 minutes or so, just until it's dry, or until it's stiff enough that the eyes aren't going anywhere. Yeah, and that's sort of the basics. You can still add, if you want, you can add some dots with a permanent marker on the side. You can shorten your gills a bit, as I'm going to do here. I'd usually wait for the glue to dry, but obviously can't do that on video. And then if you are very pedantic, you'll see there's a bit of a gap there between the eyes and the Zonker. You can sort of fill that out a little bit with UV resin once this glue's dried, or some more patiks. Also, I mean, once the glue's dry, I'll come back and I will, because I am pedantic, I will neaten up the trimming here just to get the minnow shape that I want perfect. But there you go, you get the idea, and this thing is fantastic. It swims very well in the water. This tail just wiggles a little bit, very much like a baitfish. It's just got a little bit of a shimmer to it, obviously because of this flash here and the flash in the body. It flashes the correct color in the correct places. It doesn't spin, it doesn't dart to the side. It's great. It pushes a lot of water, so it can be a good fly to fish at night. If you tie it in black and use like a 4mm tungsten bead tied jig style with the burnt mono, like I did in my last video, you can make a brilliant fly for largies on the orange. Yeah, play around. It works great for trout. I actually invented it for trout, but I found it to work very well on bass and largemouth yellowfish as well.